This podcast is sponsored by Notion Refinery. Do you play Battletech or Mechwarrior? Are you looking for a unique insignia for your unit? Or does your old logo need an update? Well, Mark over at Notion Refinery has an extensive background in the lore of Battletech, and he grew up playing the games we love. His work has appeared in official products by Catalyst Game Labs and Piranha Games. Take a look at notionrefinery.com to see if his work is right for you, or reach out to him at contact@notionrefinery.com. This information can be found in the description below. Thank you to all my patrons out there for supporting my creation of content over on YouTube, Twitch, and of course, the podcast. Speaking of podcasts, quick shout out to my 3 podcast sponsors, Crush Gaming, Chad, and Stuart. Thank you guys for the support. I appreciate you. Guess introduce yourself. Let's just go to roll into that. So anyways, thanks for doing this podcast, man. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and out there, because for the longest time I called you by the wrong name. And so I figure it's only appropriate.
You and a lot of the rest of the community. Yeah, so my in-game name is Krasnopesky. I am a member of the Cauldron. I'm the team leader of 1st Jaguar Guards, and I'm also one of the MWO comp admins. Have been for a couple of years.
I was going to say, so how long have you been playing MWO?
Oh, I mean,
since the start?
Like since it started, I suppose. Yeah, like I might have briefly played the closed beta, but not under my account. So I would have started playing like 2013 when it was sort of properly released under my actual account. Yeah, I think I played under a friend's account in closed beta, just like, having a go.
Yeah.
But yeah, for a long time.
Yeah. Okay. So you've been around since the beginning. So obviously the Cauldron, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to talk to as many of you as possible, because I feel like it's really important to put not only a name, but a face, and then people can understand like who are these people, right? Why do these people represent me? Why, are they given the helm and not others, and so forth and so on. So like, obviously we're going to talk about a few things today, but I feel like it was really important for people to, like, again, get to know who you are. And first off, like, why are you getting into this? Why did you get into, like, working with PGI or the Cauldron? Like, what drew you into this?
Well, of course, it's a hobby, of course. So it's, something on the side that I do in my life. I really enjoy playing MWO. There's not really another game that sort of works that way. I've always loved the Battletech universe. I started playing Mechwarrior 2, Mechwarrior 3, Mech Commander, all those games in the 90s. And so it's, it's just a natural sort of thing for me to continue on doing. And I suppose, I see a lot of potential in MWO to be much better than it has been. And now with the renewed focus that PGI has on the game, for whatever reason, I think it's a great thing that we can work with PGI essentially. So it's something that's, it's also very interesting as a personal, I'm not a game developer by any means, of course, I work in a completely different industry to that, but it's interesting looking into that, sort of getting a different perspective, I suppose, in a different industry that it's not in my profession.
Yeah. Let me point something out really quickly. You in particular, when I would listen, because I've sat on a few of the meetings with you and PGI and the Cauldron, and you in particular, and this is why I reached out to you, you bring a different level of perspective and focus. Does that have to do with your current job? I mean, you don't have to talk about it. It seems like you have a way to separate self and, like, hey, like the job or something. Like when you were talking, like I could see that you're like, okay, you would cut and slice and be like, okay, we got to focus on that, roger that. Like you knew the business and the separation of that. You seem to, is that because of your career and job, or?
Yeah, so the majority of my career focused on education. I'm currently a deputy principal in a private school here in Chile. But I've also done things like, project management in the past as well, which I suppose, which is what you're saying, doing that sort of, that more project management, directing and focusing and having a concept of what the goal is really important. So, for example, you often see in a lot of the dialogue of the Cauldron that, it'll be around, we want to make the game more fun, which is a very broad and subjective sense. But that was sort of something I introduced as a good broad goal for us to have, because there were a lot of different ideas about what we wanted to do, and there's lots of different things we want to do. But at the end of the day, the concept is you want to make the game more enjoyable, more fun, and then that does a lot of things as a result. It gets more people playing the game, and it creates more player retention. And then if you want to look at it from like a selfish perspective, then the game is better for me to play, I suppose.
Sure. Yeah.
There's more people, there's more competition. The comp scene will get better, so that's one thing I really enjoy playing. More people who are skilled will come back to the game, etc., etc.
Sure. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, even personally, like, I want the game to get more people. I want it to get more attention. You said something earlier. You said there's still a lot of potential, or you think there's a lot of potential in the game, and I've said that, and I think it's true. Like, I was talking to Darren recently. It wasn't online. I was talking to him, and I was like, you know what you guys are sort of doing right now? It's sort of like you're stabilizing a trauma victim. You're stabilizing something that's been dying, right? And that's with the help of you guys, right? In the game was dying, right? Like, definitely, physically. Yeah. So you got to stop the bleeding, control that and stuff. But one of the things that, that popped in my head after I made that statement was, okay, once you stabilize, which is, in my opinion, the next few months that you guys get the balance and stuff, like once you stabilize, it's like, what's next? And that the potential there, right? Right. Like, and so like why do you, when you say potential, what does that mean to you?
To me, well, I suppose I draw comparisons to other situations that I've seen, like exactly what's unfolding now, and they've done it successfully. So a game that I used to play, going through mainly high school, I suppose, was RuneScape. I'm sure plenty of people have maybe played it or at least heard of it. So RuneScape, started around 2000, and it's gone through multiple different iterations. And it was sort of I stopped playing in the middle, as many people did, because of decisions that the developer of RuneScape made. So they did a similar thing that PGI's done. They started off strong, they grew very well. Then they made a lot of different decisions that essentially drove people away from the game and made the game less popular. And that died for quite a while. At the moment, it's going, for years now, it's been going through a resurgence, and it's more popular than ever. And this is a game that started in literally 2000, the year 2000. And so currently, it's still quite populated. It's got, a big, very large community, much bigger than MWO by far. And the company's still, it's the main product of its company, Jagex, that runs it. And one of the main, funnily enough, one of the main things they did is they brought back an older version of the game. So you can already see correlations here.
Yep.
And one of the hugest things they did was they did it a bit different to what's happening in Mechwarrior. They literally made it completely community driven. So they said, okay, here's a version of the game that we've noticed a lot of people love, right? We've got a copy of it. We're just going to put it out there, and we're going to call it RuneScape Classic, okay, or 2007 Scape, they call it. And now any change we make to this game needs to be majority player driven. So they say, okay, well, after 2007, there were these things introduced the game. We want to bring them back, but we're going to make it a community poll, and it has to reach like 2/3 majority, for example. I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
On the community poll for it to be implemented, or maybe even 75%. It needs to have a majority of the community say, yes, we want that in the game. And that's what they're still doing today. And they've been doing that for years now. Like 5 years or something they've been doing this. And it's just getting more and more popular.
Yeah.
So it's almost it's a very similar situation what's happening here, just on a larger scale because the game's more popular.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's you mentioned bringing the game back to basically a state that everyone enjoyed. And I mean, that is 4 years ago. That's about 4 or 5 years ago. Like, right?
For Mechwarrior terms?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it might differ a lot for everyone. What the time frame I hear the most is pre-Kodiak, essentially. So early 2016, around then. That was what a lot of people that I communicate regularly with regard as like the point of most balance. Now, the problem is for Mechwarrior, we do have a lot of good stuff, new stuff now from that period that we're obviously not going to throw out. So it's not exactly the same where we do, okay, let's just roll back to the start of 2016 and then go from there, because there's a lot of stuff, including new tech and heaps of new mechs and everything, that we don't need to get rid of.
Sure.
But the same sense of, I suppose, looking at gameplay balance and looking at, well, just today, mech mobility, the first pass of mech mobility, the concepts from the Cauldron were released to the public today. So a lot of that is based on, well, that's pre-December 2015 agility stats. So moving back more towards those sort of stats.
And what's interesting, obviously, and a lot of people know, I did contract work for PGI. I was actually one of the individuals working with Chris on engine desync, and 2015 was before engine desync, if I'm correct. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so December 2015, they changed at the time, the skill tree.
Yep.
It was essentially an agility nerf. They reduced a lot of the impact the skill tree had in December 2015, and then in 2016 or something, that was when there was the actual, the engine desync occurred. So a lot of
like a double whammy.
Yeah, they got hit twice because some mechs, not all, some mechs actually got a little bit better from engine desync.
Of course.
It just depended, but a lot of them got worse. But if you compare like pre-December 2015 and then engine desync, some mechs got like hit twice in a row. And so they went from, in the space of a year, they went from very viable and usable to not. Yeah.
Let me ask you, in that regard, maybe because I'm too close to the sun, I feel like I've been detached from it for a while. I have no like skin in, the game as far as like engine desync, but it gets brought up time and time again. And my main thing is, and highlight to people is like, hey, don't forget there were mechs like the BJ and the Cataphract and all the mechs that had 250 or below engines that got absolutely hosed with the multiplier, if you will. The problem was the numbers that were pre-desync and pre-skill tree, they never lived up. Like, I think I gave the Locust like, it was like 175% excel or whatever, but it needed that at the time to be able to juke and jive and all that. Well, unfortunately, I wasn't the one in charge of rolling those numbers over to the skill tree and or desync, and those numbers were never the same. And so, like, do you feel that it still has a place in the game, or do you feel that the multiplier, there should be a benefit in having a larger engine? Like, how do you feel about it?
Yeah. No, so I think engine desync as a concept was good because the benefit of a larger engine is you get to move faster, which has a lot of benefits. I don't think agility necessarily needs to be tied just to having a larger engine. I think that concept's fine. What a major problem in my mind was engine desync happened at the same time as the skill tree, right? I think a lot of the assumptions were, and I could be wrong on this, but from my perspective at least, a lot of the assumptions were, well, with the skill tree, you can increase mechs to even better they were, or like you can use that skill tree to do it. But in reality, what happens in a competitive sense, and I'm not saying competitive as in comp, like even if you want to be competitive and play well in quick play, a lot of the time you can't afford to invest very heavily into the mobility tree because the other trees are just better. Yeah. So functionally what ends up happening is you just go, well, technically I could get, my mech more agile than it was before, or I could bring it up to at least parity. But now it's missing out on all these other things that the other mechs aren't missing out on. If you have a mech and to make it agile and nice, you have to invest heavily in the mobility tree. Then there's other mechs that don't need to do that. Those other mechs will have more armor, more firepower, more cooling, more sensor nodes, radar deprivation, more strikes. So it's
a good comparison.
That's a big problem with that concept. Yeah.
I look at the Timby. As soon as the Timby got hit, everyone's like, you got to buff it, because if you don't, I'm just going to go play the Cauldron because it's lighter, and guess what? It actually has more pod space, has 28 tons, but it's more agile just because it's a 65 ton. So like I call
that's
it
exactly what happened, right?
Yeah, it's whack-a-mole.
People played the Cauldron born, and that was it.
Yeah. I just feel like, and I feel like we could definitely dive. I don't want to cover skill tree just yet, but obviously because we're here, I just feel like it brings up another thing I wanted to ask you, which is, at the time, I feel like what you basically had in MWO's history is you had a very small, and by small I mean like Paul at the time and Chris making decisions on a game in a global sense of things. you guys, there's like 20 of you. Do you feel like, obviously I already know the answer to this, but I just feel like, just to point out that I feel like it's so important of why you need so many different perspectives. And I see it every single day in your guys' Discord of like, you guys will be talking something and someone of you is like, yeah, no, that's that, or, oh yeah, I just feel like it's so important to have a whole set of eyeballs and not necessarily even tell you guys like one's right or wrong, but it's like, oh, hey, just FYI, if like you do that, we have this thing over here, don't forget like this. And someone's like, oh yeah, like, and I feel like it's so important that you have to have that sort of oversight, I guess,
You have
or
different perspectives, so
yeah.
it helps people bring up things.
How's that
And
been for
yeah,
you?
yeah, it's been good. I definitely think there's strength in numbers, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I can draw comparisons again to other games, right? Like I sort of did with RuneScape and the other concept we were talking about before of reviving the game. In this particular instance, there are plenty of games that are quite popular that have had a large involvement of community people in terms of direct contact and meetings and stuff around balance.
Sure.
Eve Online is one
Yeah.
that I know of. Eve Online has, I don't know what they call theirs, but they've essentially got a council of very invested, knowledgeable players that work directly with the developers on, balance updates and things, right?
Yeah.
And that's quite a successful game. So there's precedence of having groups of players. Lots of competitive games like StarCraft 2 definitely consult with StarCraft 2
Sure.
professional gamers.
Sure.
And we don't have any professional gamers in Mechwarrior Online. It's too small for that sort of thing to happen. But you can draw comparisons, across the board with different things like that. So I think it's really useful to have, yes, one, multiple perspectives and more people looking at the balance.
Sure.
Two, to have people who play the game a lot and have like a very deep knowledge of the game. I think those are both really important aspects to have. Being a game developer and working in the game industry, of course, is beneficial as well. And that's something. Well, of course, I don't know the professions of everyone in the Cauldron, but I don't think we have any, dedicated game developers, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like we don't have any people who their profession is, and that makes sense to a certain extent, because if that's your day job, are you really going to do that as a hobby as well, unpaid?
Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe, but
Maybe.
most likely not.
Yeah,
Most
no,
likely you'd want to get paid for your work if that's
Yeah.
your profession. So I think all those different elements are really important, and I wasn't involved earlier, like 2017, 2018, when the first iteration of the Cauldron, called the Gulag back then, did their thing. But I thought that it was, from an outsider's perspective back then, that it was a really great opportunity that PGI was squandering by not utilizing that resource.
Yeah.
Because they could have worked, with that group of players who I wasn't involved with back then. They could have worked back then with them. You know, and I think we would have seen similar results.
I don't know.
Now.
Yeah. No, I don't think you would have. I think you've had to have the people involved that you do now to make it work, if I'm honest. Like, knowing that on a personal level, with all due respect, I don't think it would have worked with the people at PGI at the time. I just feel like the reason it's working now is because some people have moved on. I feel like there was ego involved as well. And I think you need the right mindset, and the right mindset, in my opinion, has been Matt and Darren, of just basically saying is, we are not the experts. We want to work with the community, and we want to listen to the community. And of course, like you said, there are plenty of like other stories of that working. I'm sure there's some that probably don't work, but also too is, me and Darren, even when we did contract work back in the day, always felt that there should have been a very, very good relationship with the community as far as making decisions. And it was, as you say, squandered. Like it never, like, even when I started doing the quirks back in the day, I wasn't able to even talk about it. I wasn't able to like really consult, which really made it, again, it narrows your field of view, and like being able to like, do stuff, and you make errors, you make mistakes, you know, and so forth and so on. So like, I feel like the reason why it's successful now is because of the individuals that are taking the reins. Like,
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But that's with anything, right? Like, you need to have a willingness to work as a team and be open about things. And if that doesn't exist, then you can't collaborate with people. But we're talking about very, very basic principles of
management,
of business essentially and management, right? Those are things that are just
and that's
essentials.
and that's not me like bad mouth anybody. It's just I think that's just the reality. Like I understand too, like being a game developer or designer, if you're a lead guy at Paul or whatever, he's got a million, he's got multiple, not a million, he's got multiple people underneath him. He's dealing with the QA. He's doing all this stuff. Like he doesn't have the literally physical time to like sometimes, reach out and have conversations on a daily basis. I get it, but I just feel like, the game is going in a good direction, but that sort of leads me to one of the things I want to talk to you today about. We'll talk about the weapons and April and what's Magility and stuff like that. But I feel like that being said, you guys are stabilizing or bringing the game back to a level. One of the discussion topics that I think if it doesn't happen now, and I know it's happening behind the scenes, which is we need to talk about the solo and group experience. And I wanted to get your perspective on things. And then I also wanted to throw some stuff out at you of, I feel that it's maybe not due right this second, but I feel like a decision has to be made of what direction the game's going, whether you're going to keep it the way it is, solo and groups together, split them. What is the purpose of quick play versus other game modes and so forth and so on. And so I wanted to ask you, and before I give, any more, I want to ask you, how do you feel about the current soup queue, as it's called? For those that don't know, it's basically solo and groups together.
Yeah, it's a good term for it.
How do you feel about it? Do you think it's been, obviously, PGI, Paul did, PGI made the decision last, he started talking about it in April, and I believe it went in May or June of last year of 2020. And that was because the population of group queue had gotten so low that they were getting like stupid long wait times, especially in Oceanic, where it would drop down to, 600 players at,
I was living in the Oceanic region before that stage, so I've got a perspective about that. But yeah, I've got an opinion, of course. I don't think that soup queue being introduced last year was necessarily a bad thing, given the very low population that we had, of course including the limited resources that PGI was devoting to MWO at the time. So I don't think necessarily that soup queue introduction was bad. And in fact, via its introduction, we saw certain people, like Oceanic units, coming back to the game because finally they could play together with their friends. So I think that was fun. There were, of course, other concepts floated around that weren't ultimately done, but that's neither here nor there. But looking into the future, as the population continues to increase, or hopefully it continues to increase, and we have new players being retained, and so on, I definitely think there's scope to remove the so-called soup queue and split it again. But for me, I would not completely split it. I would make a sort of a hybrid concept. And I'll explain that a bit more detail now. But the main thing is we need to be very careful in doing this. Because yes, people have complaints about soup queue. And yes, there are issues with it. If I go in a 4-man with 3 other JGX pilots where the win rate is extremely high.
Yeah.
That's not to say we don't lose. We'd lose. Like I was playing soup queue today and we lost once or twice out of, however many games we played. So that is big issues. But on the other hand, if you just remove soup queue, the Oceanic community did not have a group queue properly for like 2 years before NA collapsed, right? And I used to live in Australia. That I don't live there any longer. I live in Chile, like I sort of mentioned before. But it had died well before that, right? So we saw, I suppose, the effects first. And the effects were that a lot of the scene died and a lot of the units died, essentially. They just withered away over time.
Because you couldn't find matches.
Yeah, you can't get matches with it in a group. People were, sync dropping together in quick play, which is not the same. So my concept is, and this has been floated, it's not necessarily it's not my personal concept, it's just a concept that, I like that people have talked about, is I like the 8v8 group queue concept. I think that's a good one. Because 8v8, in groups helps create matches much easier than 12v12, for example. Attached to that, I really think that a solo player opt-in to that would be an excellent way to make sure that the group queue will stay alive, even in low times, like oceanic times. And of course, not everyone will want to opt in. That's fine, but there should be a little bit of maybe an incentive for people to opt in. Like, oh no, if you opt in to group queue, you get a permanent 5% C-bill boost, for example. I'm not going to get into the specifics of that. That needs to be balanced and considered its own right. I haven't really looked at that, but I think there should be an opt-in to the group queue for solo players to help populate that queue, and they should probably get some sort of incentive attached to that as well. The third consideration with that, I think there should be a kicker for groups. Just say you're a 4-man group in a AP prime time on a Tuesday night. There's no other people around. There's not enough people opting in to get a game. After X amount of minutes, again, that's something that would have to be evaluated and looked at. You just get put into a solo game anyway. Essentially, just say you're sitting there for 4 minutes as a group, you haven't got a game. They go, okay, bang, just go into a quick play game. Given the amount of quick play games that do occur, having a system like that will not have a huge impact on, it won't have a massive negative impact. Maybe that particular quick play game will, but the quantity of games in quick play where there would be a group would be very small comparatively.
Okay.
So I suppose what I'm saying is it would be great if it could be done. We do need more players first. And it is something that needs to be done very carefully with a lot of consideration, because just splitting it again at this point in time, I don't think will be successful at the moment without some other things to add it on.
Okay, I mean, you bring up some great perspectives. Do you think there's a certain population that the game would have to reach to make this successful? I mean, do you have any particular number? Because I think at last month, I think it was 23,000 in a month.
April was 24,500 or something like that.
Yeah. So it's obviously going up. Agility, I think that'll bring more people back. Do you have what's
a number you think?
Yeah, because and you also mentioned 4-man groups, so you're saying 8v8 but max of 4-mans. Is that basically what you're saying?
Not necessarily. I was just referring to that in terms of getting put into quick play.
Okay.
Because obviously, if you have an 8-man group, I would never recommend putting that into a random quick play match.
Sure.
That was a la 2013.
Yeah.
It wasn't a great time back then necessarily.
Yeah, that was on my our honeymoon when they made the decision to just go full. I feel like that was Pandora's box. Can we go back in history there? Do you? I compare it to. I think it was a mistake. I think it was them not capitulating, because I don't feel like I feel like it's weird hearing someone say, I've got buddies, I should be able to drop with as many of them as I want. And I'm like, well, what other competitive game allows that? Even quick play, World of Tanks, World of Warships, World of Warplane, all of the comparables where you actually have more control in MWO than you've ever had in any of these other ones. And to me, it's well, just realize what you're doing is you're sacrificing match quality for player choice. And it may not bother you right now, but for me at the time in groups, it was I keep going up against groups like you, and where you would see a group of EMP roll around and shit, then they run into JGX or whoever 228, and then they would respawn of okay, we just keep seeing dropping, and it was just then you have us just caught in the middle of it, oh crap, I just feel if you're willing to sacrifice one, don't then turn around and complain about the matchmaker, because the matchmaker can only do so much, right? When you have that much freedom of choice, I just feel it was a mistake from the beginning to allow that big of, it's Pandora's box. And the only reason I got pulled back was because Group Q basically died. Like that was the only reason they made the adjustment last April. Like,
Yeah.
you know, so I just didn't know if there was this particular number. Like, yeah, but I guess you don't really know.
No, I mean, I'd definitely be looking at 30,000 plus.
Yeah.
I would think. Yeah. I mean, it could be successful now if you just split it and made it 8v8 Group Q, and that's it, and then you did it. It'll be successful, you know, NA prime time most nights.
Yeah.
But it won't be successful AP prime time. That's the problem.
Sure. Do you feel that if you did that, what does the Group Q look like? Because like, I think
a lot of stomps as well.
I hear like a lot of concerns of people are saying like, hey, you know, like if you just do Group Q, like how are you going to balance? You know,
it'll be like faction play.
Yeah, you just
yeah,
whatever happens, and you get
how else will you do it? I mean,
yeah. Well,
like the skill disparity between groups is very large.
Yeah,
and so there's multiple considerations that happen, right? Like you say, okay, you can do it the very, very old school system way was just elo based. Sure. And what ended up happening for the people who had the top elo was they'd sit there for 15 minutes and not get a match because they'd go, oh no, we've got all these other teams, you know, and people that are similar, we'll drop them instead. Yeah. So it's a hard way to win either way. If you have 100,000 players a month,
it's a little bit less. Easy. Well, yeah.
I'm overestimating. Like,
yeah.
The more players that you have available,
the more options you have.
The easier it is to balance all this.
Yeah, I remember
the fewer players you have, the more difficult it is, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm not by any means, you know, I can hold my own when it comes to mathematics, but I'm not the person who's going to crunch all the numbers and look at it. There's much better people in the community, including the Cauldron, who can do that. But at the end of the day, you need to find a happy medium. And it's always difficult because the skill disparity is quite high at times.
So this brings up the topic and sort of I'm going to throw you a curveball here. A few days ago on my stream, someone came into chat and they said, I believe that the merger or the split of solo and groups back in the day, they said, I don't know if it was destroyed the game, but they said it was bad for the game. And my first reaction was, I disagree with you. Like, I think it was a great thing. It's never fun to have solos and groups and stuff. And they kept going on and we traded back and forth as far as like, I was trying to pick their brain. And I think we just moved on. I had a normal stream. It is what it is. I mean, we just agreed to disagree. As like many times, I was actually out running, listening to a podcast, and my mind wanders. And it got me thinking, am I not being critical enough of my own bias of what I feel like? And that got me thinking could there actually be merit into what he was saying? And would you agree that the only way to control groups, even like right now, is you can't do it via tonnage. You have to limit the amount of people in groups. That's like in the soup queue right now. To affect a group, you have to shrink them down to a 3 or a 2 to affect the pull they have on the outcome of the match, right? I think we can both agree on that, right? You can reduce them down to 100 tons. There's still going to be 100 tons of 4 skill, you know, like you just...
no. It'll for the very high-end teams, you could run 4 20-tonners and you'll have an extremely high win rate.
So that being said, what it got me going down was, I think what the person was trying to say is, maybe, just maybe, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on this. This is their idea, I believe, and that person can always let me know, was could you keep solo and groups together, but rethink the experience of saying, right now you can only have 1 4-man, which sometimes actually slips through, and you'll have a 3-man and a 2-man, so there'll be 5 people. We've seen that multiple times.
I think that's intended, though.
Yeah, it's a blow-off.
You can't have more than... If you've got a 4-man, that's the only group. Yeah. But you can have a 2 2-mans or a 3-man and a 2-man.
So what if... You brought up a thing that I feel like is a problem with even the going with, which is there will be times, potentially, that either the match needs individual solo players who opt in, or at lower population times, There just may not groups, and you say basically it's a blow off valve, and those people just be put into a solo match anyways. My question is, what if you just allowed 3-man groups, 2 or 3-man groups in solo right now, and you allowed multiple groups, so you could have 2 or 3 groups on both sides, whatever mixed match, and that really, what we're saying is, then you don't have to worry about splitting the queues in quick play at all, and that what you're searching for is what needs to be a replacement for faction play, or whatever we're going to call it. Let's say they did the whatever, some cool badass respawn conquest mode for tug and pull of clan versus IS, whatever it is, like whatever the replacement for faction, because faction play needs revamped. Solaris, we all know, needs revamped. All those discussions later on in the year. What are your thoughts to that? Because one of the things that I came to the conclusion is then you no longer have to worry about, one 4-man just dominating. You never have to worry about a population of opting in, or, hey, we just can't find anybody in Oceanic time frame. And I feel like so many people do not appreciate the suffering that you guys have, or had, I should say, and actually continue to have. I know Ash and all the Oceanic players. Do you think, like, what should a quick play be, and should quick play be sort of, what you proposed, a group queue where there's no really balancing? Like, what does that make sense? Like, how do you feel about the proposal? And do you see merits? Do you see flaws? Like, do you have any, like?
Yeah, I mean, and this sort of gets back to balance design as well, like from stuff we're doing in the Cauldron. There isn't just one right way.
Sure.
There's multiple ways it can work, and the same happens in businesses of all types. There's different ways that you can do things that come maybe to the same end result, or come to slightly end results, but that are also still positive results.
Sure.
And sometimes, certain ways will be more efficient than others, and that's, game design, business decisions, those things, they all look into what's more efficient, what's going to produce the results we want. Definitely something like that could work. And I mean, you were saying before, World of Tanks has a system where it's max 3, isn't it, of a group?
Out of 15, yeah.
So it's 15 and max 3. So it's a better ratio. So the group will have less impact on the game. Sure. I've always thought, like 4-man group can definitely have a huge impact. 3-man group, even, especially if the players are a very high skill, can still have a very big impact. Getting down to a 2-man, even if you have a 2-man of the top level players, yes, they'll have a big impact, but sometimes in games they can still never win,
Yep.
So you could more balance it. So yeah, I do see merits in dropping the group size and then directing larger groups to somewhere else, wherever else that may be.
Sure.
I can see merit in that system. Again, it's something that requires PGI, number one, of course, to implement. They need engineers to do such a thing.
Yep.
They need to devote their resources. They need to see the merit in it as a business, which I think they should if they want to continue to grow, Mechwarrior Online. But I really think that it's another one of those things where they should really open the board, not just the Cauldron saying, to the whole community, and say, hey, we really want to have some ideas and concepts thrown at us because we're going to devote some resources to fixing this stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's something they should look at. But then rather than, just make it community consensus, we gave Kraz, 1,000 votes on his random idea he came up with. Let's go with that one. It should be they should look at all those and compare them internally, with the relevant professionals needed, and then come out with a few proposals, and do it as a iterative sort of approach.
Isn't that the sort of the problem right now? Is you have Matt, Darren, Francois, the new map guy, and Mark Nicholson, 3D modeler.
Yeah,
right. So I feel like what they're doing is they're leaning on the
and
community.
Nico as well. He's working on Mechwarrior Online too.
But I guess my point being is I feel like that's why I wanted to talk to you, and I want to inspire other people to have this conversation, because if no one is talking about this, and this isn't me saying you guys are wrong about wanting 8v8 or group, I'm saying is if we don't have these communications, inevitably you're going to miss better ideas because they're just never brought up and no one's questioning. That's why, like, you know, even in, you know, Navid's in chat all the time and people are like, oh yeah, they should, you know, just listen to him. I'm like, not all the time. I want to question Navid. I want to pick it apart. I want to understand all the directions he's coming from. Same thing with you. Like I want to be I want to be as sure as I can that we haven't at least, you know, went left field and right field and talked about these things, because I just feel like, especially with this 8v8, I don't mind 8v8 12v12. I'm still not convinced on that, because again, the game doesn't change. I understand like the numbers and stuff like that, but my thing is like, what is better for MWO, the populate? What is the best solution for the overall population? When I see that, I think the person was bringing up is splitting those, especially with our numbers, may not. Are we just going to put ourselves right back in the boat? And really, what are you trying to solve? Are you trying to solve the groups have so much control of the outcome of matches, which we've been saying for years? And then 2, solos are like, we want the randomness, but then, you know, like, what is PGI's goal here? And unfortunately, that's why I'm going full circle, is I don't think Darren and Matt have the answer. I think they're looking to you guys, and I think they're looking to the community for those answers. And so, like, if we don't talk,
not only do they not have the answers, they also don't have the resources currently.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a moot point.
Yeah.
I don't think at this stage they could even split the queue if they wanted to.
Yeah.
They have to get an engineer first to be able to do it. They don't have one.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, you know, that's why I suppose I haven't really focused on it greatly, because they're not at a stage where they're even capable of doing it. From my perspective, maybe they are, but from my knowledge, they're not. And funnily, you should mention it. You know, people talk about we want the randomness of having no group. From my perspective, as in a tier 1 sense, it's the groups actually create more randomness for me. If you have a game full of just 12 solos, historically it just NASCARs and it's very predictable. And so, as like, just say if you want to farm and like do a lot of damage as a very skilled player in quick play with no groups, you just, you know, take a relatively fast mech, hit sort of near the front of your NASCAR, push it along quicker than the enemy's NASCAR, trade favorably with the rear end of theirs, and you'll end up doing 1,000 damage and winning the game more often than not. And it won't be, and the tier 1 games have been like that for years and years. Yeah. So with implementation of groups, sometimes the 4-man group is actually going to do something different to that, which does create.
I've seen that recently.
Yeah. And that's something that when, like, for example, I play with my friends in Soup Q, we will almost never NASCAR literally on purpose.
Yeah.
We don't want a NASCAR. That's part of the reason a lot of us stop playing quick play. So let's not do it. Let's do things that aren't that, and then make it into a better match from our perspective.
Well, that's why I was also saying with the idea of this person, even if you don't go with this idea fully, is like saying, yeah, why don't you just allow multiple groups and solos will be in the middle? You'll have 2 and 3 and 4-mans out there, and everybody, you know, you have 12. We sort of used to have, like, I feel like it'd be better for the game right now in popular. I mean, does that make, you know, like...
Yeah, no. And another problem we've actually seen since April patch, because there's so many groups, the wait times for groups are longer because of the limitations of groups on quick play. Yeah. Especially the night the patch hit, which went to a very high number, like from what it has been. I think it did the highest number it's been in months. Like concurrent players on Steam, I'm talking about, just to be clear. The wait times were in the minutes for 4-man groups, despite the population being bigger than ever. And that's because of the limitations of groups. Yeah. You can only have one 4-man. So if you're a 4-man, you got to sit there in some line that you couldn't see to get a game. But it all comes down to, and this is a complex topic and definitely not something I'm an expert on, is the way the matchmaker allocates its internal matches, how it creates its matches first, then how it organizes the 24 people it's picked, which it doesn't really at the moment. Sure. You know, then you can talk about things like tonnage disparity, and then another big problem is just how you measure skill in this game. Yeah. Which, I mean, we've worked on that, but it's still, you know, you'll still have someone like Proton, who's arguably one of the best players ever played the game, will be rated exactly the same in terms of the matchmaker as someone who's LRM'd their way to tier 1 as a pretty brand new player.
Sure. That's
like there's no distinguishing difference from the matchmaker's perspective. They're the same. They're both tier 1. They're the same.
Yeah. Man, talking about skill in this game, that's another topic that's came up recently. And it was in regards at first to how a lot of players look at match score and PSR as like a reward instead of it being like, hey, just FYI, it's not. It's supposed to be a tool to say, like you just said, Proton should not go up against some, like the idea would
he should not be a value, not necessarily shouldn't go up against.
Or he shouldn't be the same value.
He shouldn't be evaluated in the same way as someone who is of far lesser skill.
Yeah. But we only have 5 levels of PSR, and so you don't have that finite control between like someone who's just at tier 1 and above all the way to like, you don't have that, like, and then on top of that, how matchmaker sometimes will put like an entire 4-man of your group, and then it'll put Magic, Pain Glove, and me on the same group. It's like the other team has nobody, and you're just like, why did matchmaker do that?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's basically any balancing factor for that, and nor could it be, because if you're all considered tier 1, you're all considered tier 1. Well, everyone's of equal skill.
That's what I was saying, is like, the idea would be, what if you just reduced, I guess even right now, 3-man group max, reduce the tonnage accordingly, because it is, you can do absurd things. But then
3 war same time, I believe.
Yeah, right now you can. And then, but reduce that, and then also say just allow multiples, because like if I go, that's one of the issues is like, I know the power of some of these 4-man groups or even 3-mans, and as a solo player, I'm like, I like the challenge of going against other solos, but I don't like the like maybe my group isn't. Maybe we don't even have a group. That's another thing. Whereas if you had 3 and 2 others, maybe I just feel like if you just did that, maybe it just sort of help even the odds on both sides. But talk about skill for a second.
Just before you move on to the skill part of thing, I mean, you could do that, and why not? Just do it. Give it a go for a month.
Yeah, see
what happens. It's not gonna be the end of the world. And you literally say it as that. You say, hey, we're gonna try this out. We really honestly don't know what the results will be, but we're going to do it. We'll see what happens. We'll evaluate it again, and if it doesn't work, then we can just revert back, and it's just a month of it, and the month will be something different for people anyway. Yeah.
And it's funny, you mentioned 4-man's organized. I don't know how many times I've dropped in match, there'll be a 4-man on my team. I'll cue the button to talk and be like, hey guys, there's 4 of you. Anybody calling, the drops? Just crickets. And I'm like, you're a 4-man group. You can lead us to victory with a few choice words. Just, hey, we're going over here. And data, I dropped with them like 3 times, and I was like, guys, just tell us where you're going. And they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna hunker back here. Oh, thank you. So and then we won the match. And it was just like, just use comms. So just because someone's organized, they don't always communicate that. If you're 4-man out there, for the love of God, just hit your void button and just let your teammates know what you're gonna do. Anyways,
I mean, I suppose when getting back to Data and his group, they're all Italians. They don't always have the best English.
I know.
So it's like, and that's not to say like a lot of them have excellent English, but if they're all having a chat in Italian between themselves on Discord, they might not necessarily be even paying attention to what's being said in game. And in saying that, on a few of my accounts, not my main account, but I play a few different alts. Some of them I just have the voice comms turned completely off. It's just off. It's just never even on. So I mean, I understand what you're getting at in terms of if you're a 4-man team, you should be working with the team and definitely, ideally, verbalizing with them. But in my mind, it's not an obligation.
Yeah.
One thing I often do though is I'll take the command, and I'll put down the map markers. I'll literally just put down attack here, and you've probably seen me do it before because I do it a lot of matches. I'll literally put attack here, usually the anti-NASCAR way. Like, don't NASCAR, let's go left, and that'll just be what I do. And then, funnily enough, a lot of the time the people will actually follow that, especially if you're a 4-man and you just go that way. Yeah. Because then, that's like a third of the team's gone there. I better go there anyway.
Speaking of anti-NASCAR, I've had some interesting matches around patch day that I saw a lot of names I hadn't seen before, and it was interesting because I feel like that old guard came back, and it was just like, like they didn't NASCAR. They just held the positions on the map, even like on Canyon with like no comms. And it was one of those things where I've been critical of, like, it's not always, it's a multitude of map design, player choice, like in behavior.
It's very difficult to ascertain exactly.
And then game design. Right, yeah, it's like three different things of like...
Probably more, I would say. Like it's a lot.
A
lot of stuff goes into it, yeah.
But like we used to not have NASCAR as much. Was that because we were in group queue and we were organized and the other teammates knew? Yeah, you just hold these points, you let your lights work together, you do, you know, like, was it that? Is that why my memory is skewed? Is because when they made that change and I was dropping in groups all the time, I just didn't see as much of it, and it's still going on. And like, I don't know, but it's interesting when you talk about NASCAR. Obviously, we've got some map changes coming to Canyon Network in May from Francois. You guys have sat down and worked and talked with him specifically. Yeah. I haven't had him on the podcast yet, but Bear Claw, I said he's loved the conversations that have happened. Do you have anything in particular to add to that?
Yeah. He's very enthusiastic. He's a nice person just to talk to. In terms of, you know, what he'll do with the maps and everything, of course, that's to be seen because we haven't really gotten anything yet to look at. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how the concepts and ideas that he implements eventuate and whether they do, you know, have an impact on NASCAR or, you know, I mean, when you could discuss NASCAR with, you know, 100 people in the community. If you made them do an analysis of why NASCAR happens, there's going to be commonalities between them all, but there's also going to be a lot of differences, right?
Sure.
And they might not all be wrong. Maybe it comes down to a lot of things. It's very hard to ascertain exactly why it happens, and you know, people have different reasons they think, and but I mean, at the end of the day, it's a very difficult thing to pin down exactly why and how and what goes into it. Well, you could stop it. You just put a big wall on the right side that's unscalable, and then you can't NASCAR, right? Well, you can physically stop it, but is that actually a good idea? Yeah. Probably not.
Well, I guess it's like what causes it, right? We see the effect on some of the maps, right? And some of it's Canyon and others, HPG. It's exacerbated by because like you have no man's land, you can't like protect yourself, you can't maneuver, there's no places to like hold.
Central objects, right? Like are always a big NASCAR thing. You've got it on bog, well, that big hill in the middle that NASCAR always have around.
Caustic Valley,
Valley's got the Caldera. You've got HPG where it's, of course, you'll just go around. I mean, that's definitely a big part of it, certain map designs. Canyon Network as well, you've got the central pillars and then people NASCAR around them. Like, so a lot of it is central pillars. I think opening up a lot of those maps would help stop NASCAR. I think that'd be one thing. You can also, you know, I've heard people talk about NASCAR also occurs because in quick play the attackers are favored, and some people remark that that's because it can be difficult to defend positions because of like what's one way, you know, lowered agility makes it more difficult to peek in and out without taking too much damage, and I don't know, maybe strikes are overpowered, so holding down a defensive position. We've just, you know, essentially nerf strikes. Before would really you could lose 40% of your mech from an unlucky strike, you know. So it's harder to defend the position. There's a lot of concepts that go into it. You know,
I think they're all true in some ways. I mean, there's got to be because I mean the nerfs, the unfunning, if you will, of MWO, the nerfs that were happening.
I like that concept, the unfunning of MWO.
Right. I mean, because you know, I hate the term TTK because time to kill I feel like it just became a scapegoat concept that like Paul and Chris were using, but like it just lost its meaning because it's like when you slow mechs down, not all of them, like you said, some got faster, but when you slow, your assaults become vulnerable. I mean, they're a liability now. Like they're not scary. Same thing with heavies. You come with scale and just the weapons and the changes, and the next thing you know, you know, like you come around a corner and you're just not really as frightened of a dire wolf as you used to be, right? So like I feel like that spawn locations and stuff. I think we can obviously talk, but I feel like NASCAR is an effect that is caused by player behavior, caused by balance changes, and then it's exacerbated on certain maps because of map design.
You can even say, like, look at it as from a mech perspective. The vast majority of mechs are right-sided.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's how it started, remember?
You want to move to the right so you can peek around and then protect your worst torso. And that makes also mechs that are left-sided, like the Zeus. It makes them more difficult to play because if you want to just have to keep up with the NASCAR, you got your weapons on the wrong side of the mech to be able to shoot with.
I mean, look at Cataphract, 3 Delta, and the Dragon Slayer, and then
back in the day they were the mechs, and then Highlander as well.
Yeah. And then the Shadowhawk, and it was like Shadowhawk, but it was like AC-20 and jump jets, and then it replaced the Hunchback. Like the evolving of the dynamic. But let's talk about skill tree for a second. I loathe the skill tree.
So I was about to say, it's something you're very passionate about. I think you're more passionate about it than I am.
I feel that it's led to thousands of people leaving. Like, this is one of those things where at top level management, actually, I can point out on the timeline, the Jarls list, to a random MWO player, the date that skill tree came out, and the drop off the months, right? That is, like, to me, it's like, it's a huge, now granted, I think Matt and Darren are not tied to keeping it. It's just resources right now, which is engineers to be able to, and then a design. I just feel that is such a key thing to, I've said this before, it's shit. It was never designed for players. It was designed to replace the 3-of-a-kind system that made the grind worse. And then also I feel like it was so out of place with, Bearclaw said this last time we were doing, he said, why can't a mech just be a mech and just be? Like, why do I need to invest anything to make its agility? Why do I need to make anything to make its firepower? And there's something to be said there. And that's why I was sort of like, I've been talking about a lot about why can't just whatever it gets replaced with should be like specialization of it. Like the Raven getting a bigger bubble or whatever, like whatever you want to go. And that's where like imagination has to come out as far as like stuff. But like, I just feel like it's been, as soon as it came out, Rush should have just put on the brakes and said, we didn't get this right. We're going to revert it. We're going to work with it. But this is going back to what I was saying. 2018, I don't think it was, you didn't have the right mindset. So that's how I feel about the skill tree. How do you feel about the skill tree?
Well, I agree with you in terms of a business sense. If you look at the numbers and the population and the drop-off that happened and the negative feedback from the skill tree, it should have been obvious that you would revert it and then work on it to be better.
Sure.
Because it was just all those numbers just indicated it didn't work, right? And it doesn't take like a high-level professional analyst to be able to realize that.
Yeah.
In the current time, you're correct. And again, it's one of those things where PGI just currently, well, they have the resources, but they're using them elsewhere, right? They're working on Mechwarrior 5, and they've got another IP that I don't know much about that apparently they're working on.
No one does.
They're currently, no one knows. So they're currently, moving, like putting their resources in that and not into Mechwarrior. In the future, it's definitely one of those things that needs a big look at. And yeah, it has too much. For me, it has too much of an impact on how good a mech is. Some, like, people throw out numbers all the time. It's a mech is 100% better when it's fully skilled or whatever, however they want to describe it. What it comes down to is the feel. Essentially, when you have an unskilled mech, it feels bad to play. And then when you fully skill it up in the correct way, it feels nice to play. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be, the baseline should be, this mech feels nice to play. And then, I can do some cool stuff with whatever this extra system is. My concept has always been, and this is by no means a fleshed out, thought out idea that I'm going to present, but my concept's always been, yes, you have your base mech, like you said, it's good, you can pilot everything. And then you could have some system which is almost a kind of like, I don't like the word skill tree either. So how can a mech have skills? It's weird. Maybe like it could be something to do with like mech tuning. I don't know, like you tune a
Equipment,
car.
upgrades.
Yeah, like
some,
you can make your mech slightly quicker. You can make it do this slightly better, but not to the extent where it has to be fully like skilled out to be useful. Just to the fact where it can be a bit better, or a bit more specialized, like you were saying. I like that concept. As to the design and the implementation of all that, that's a very large project.
Yeah, that's where I feel
It's
like
very large.
PTS and like that's where I see PTS.
That needs like
yeah.
almost a development team
Yeah.
to properly flesh it out and work on it. It's a big undertaking.
Yeah.
One easy way we could do, and we've looked at in the Cauldron, is simply halving the amount of skill nodes.
Yeah.
Like you just condense them and make it like, instead of however many there are, you just literally cut them in half.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to mess with the numbers too much. You can keep the numbers about the same, just doubling the amount one skill node gives you. But that'd be one relatively simple way you could make it a bit better. Reduce the amount of clicks and et cetera, et cetera.
Someone actually brought up, it was quite interesting in chat. Shout out to Wyrot Tori. Had him on the podcast guest a few times. He's our lead engineer for Mech Commander Mercenaries, and he said, what would you do? Just remove the firepower tree, and then like that does change things. Just removing the fire, because again, when it goes to, you're always going to pick firepower, you're going to pick survivability, and then what? ECM, if you have it, you're going to have to invest 13 nodes. If you're going to take radar deprivation, if you don't, are you going to take strikes? How many strikes? I mean, operations, are you a laser vomit? And you got to invest in that. So it's like, that's where I feel like even if you consolidate, which in the interim, if you guys can do that without an engineer, which I still think you have to have an engineer do that.
No, you still have to have an engineer.
Right. So again, crux of it. But
the only thing we can currently do is change the values that exist on the skill tree.
Yeah.
So, for example, one concept we're looking at is this sort of goes along the line of what we're discussing. ECM at the moment is almost useless unless you have the double skill nodes. Like it's very close to useless.
Yeah.
Like completely without skill nodes. Which means if you have it on like a trial mech for a new player, or a new player who's bought an ECM mech, they won't even realize that, but it just won't do anything, and like they won't understand. So what we're looking at is increasing the base like value of ECM, and then reducing the skill nodes. So at the end, a skilled out, with the 2 ECM nodes is the same as now. Like, so we're not buffing it or nerfing it, but just the base of the ECM equipment is more usable.
Yeah.
So it's less reliant on the skill tree to be actually functioning.
Yeah.
So that's something we can do, and that's something we're looking at implementing in a future patch. But apart from that, like as to the layout of the skill tree or the amount of nodes, we can't affect those.
But even if it doesn't require like physically a whole lot of engineer time, which I don't think it does, to consolidate stuff, I think that's better than what we have right now. But my biggest issue still is that it's a system designed by Paul for something that I just don't feel fits Mechwarrior Online.
Yeah.
Like
I suppose there's one way we could hack a fix. You set all the costs of the skill nodes to 0, but then you also set all the values to 0. So it just functionally it wouldn't do anything. You could still click it, but it wouldn't actually do anything. That's the super hack way of doing it.
Yeah,
but obviously it's not something you'd want to do. But
I just feel that it's funny because the more and more we go on, I see what's done with the skill tree and the lack thereof of mech uniqueness, as far as outside of just the like firepower and mobility, right? Like you have stuff in the skill tree that's actually really, really cool, like, or modules that used to be modules. Like radar deprivation is a really cool thing on paper, but what they chose to do is, instead of saying only this mech or these chassis or variants have this unique ability, almost like a role warfare, they just said blanket, you can choose. Well, the only thing with that is some of them become so powerful, like radar deprivation was the go-to module. Then you dumped it into a skill tree and you made choice. Well, of course they're going to go to firepower and survivability. Like there's no choice. It's a fallacy. It's not actual. Like when you get down to it, there are nodes that you just never want to ever use or won't use because of whatever reason. And I feel like the same thing with like seismic and stuff. You have all these mechs that lack in firepower and information warfare is important, even though I know info warfare, that was a joke for the longest time. But like UAVs or like those things, what they did is they just made them global instead of making chassis and variants have unique characteristics, whether it's increased ammo. And I know you guys, again, are talking a lot of stuff behind the scenes with quirks, and I'm excited for that. But I feel like that's another issue that I feel like this skill tree is, one, literally there's no tutorial on it. Two, it's not explained to the uniqueness of what you just said about ECM. Like, and also, why am I having to invest in nodes to make a piece of equipment work? Like, it just, it's counterintuitive. And then three,
it should just work.
It should just work. And then three, you have a thousands upon thousands of quirk inputs that you can't distinguish once you start messing with the skill tree. And you could easily just consolidate those to where it's just one system and you don't have to worry about anything. But I feel like skill tree, it needs to go. Like, I just don't, I think in the like the in between time, reduce them. But I just feel like
I think for now, the Cauldron's approach is we're just not touching skill tree, just because most of the stuff that you'd want to do with it does require engineers, and anything we could do, as I said, it'd be basically a hack job.
Yeah.
I've always found it interesting in Mechwarrior. There's a lot of games, free to play games where they want you to have a grind to keep the progression up, to keep like a goal. I've always found it strange that mechs don't have levels, like in the sense of, like just an experience level for how much you play, and then you unlock like a new cool camo for it.
Yeah.
I've always found that interesting. So the skilling's always gone directly towards making the mech better.
Yeah.
Whereas you could have this other system where it's like, you got to grind your mech out, and eventually you get like a cool camo that's like,
prestige.
Like, it doesn't do anything, but it's just cool. It's like, hey, you've played this mech so much, you've hit, like sort of like the prestige system in Call of Duty.
Yeah, prestige. Yeah.
Whereas, like it's just, I've got prestige 10 mech like on my Locust, which is my favorite mech. So I unlocked like, I don't know, we won't call it the gold camo. We'll call it the platinum camo for it.
Yeah, bronze,
so suddenly
silver.
It's got this cool exclusive camo that you can only get from playing that mech a ton.
Yeah.
I've always thought like that concept would be way better than having to grind it to make your mech just simply better.
Yeah,
I think playable even.
I think what it is you have the original design was based on that old Rhine mechanic, 3 mechs. World of Tanks still did that sort of grind, like they have their tier system. They didn't. So
that seems very outdated.
Yeah.
Well, even now that's incredibly outdated.
Exactly. And then they did the skill system, but the problem is the other games didn't go that route. What they did is they upgraded their season pass model. They kept sort of the grind, but World of Tanks, they have just a linear path upgrade with a little bit of choice depending on the tank, which I've always felt would be really, really good for. It's very easy to explain, like, oh, hey, you've got that. Maybe on the Timberwolf, you only have one level of, cockpit sensors, because guess what? It's good in other, but like, you have to choose between a Hunchback having a, are you wanting multiple ballistics or only one ballistic on the Hunchback? Well, you got to choose between, big 205 millimeter, or do you want a smaller caliber, and whatever it is. But yeah, I don't know. I think it'd be, if I ever get a chance to do like a post-mortem with Paul about MWO, that would be an interesting podcast. Like, let's real talk, Paul.
The positives and the negatives of everything that went on.
Yeah, because one, we haven't seen him. He actually popped in my chat. He did not confirm, but I think he's working on the new IP, whatever that IP is. And they won't talk about it. Obviously, I get it. NDAs, all that fun stuff.
That's fine, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do know that a lot of people who have worked on Mechwarrior Online in the past don't want to return to it. And from a professional standpoint, that makes perfect sense. Like, it's you, as a professional, you want to work on new projects. At least in my perspective, you don't want to always just sit on the same thing, because sitting on the same thing and doing the same thing, can feel like stagnation essentially. Sure. Especially if you're not necessarily super passionate about that particular project.
Yeah.
Some people will be passionate about it and they'll want to, return, as I believe Mark Nicholson in particular has said that he wanted to return to the project and work on it, something of a passion of his, and that's great. But I can see, like, I don't know Paul, I think I might have said hello to him, or I've met him a couple of times, like at MechCon 2018, for example, but I don't really know him at all. But I can imagine from his perspective that he doesn't want to return, and I don't blame him by any means. I think, in fact, I think it's probably for me, if that was my position, I would do the same thing. I think I want to work on a new project and do something, that's different.
Yeah, I think I could, especially if BattleTech wasn't something you grew up like. I guess that's the difference between like myself, or you mentioned yourself. You've played all the games. You may go back and say, "Hey, I actually have the opportunity now to."
Well, yeah, it's different in that sense.
It's
a passion, as opposed to like
It'd be like, skill tree, and then we already talked about maps. Let's talk about the patch that just happened. You guys, am I correct in saying that the March patch was a blessing in disguise?
A blessing in disguise in terms of
it happened,
having a nice contrast.
Well, it happened, and then it forced the changes instead of going to PTS. Just the culmination of events, it led to us getting, I think, to April and the weapon changes, and now Magility a lot quicker, I think. And then the community can also see the contrast of what the Cauldron wants and is going for versus what Chris wanted.
Yeah, so I mean, the Cauldron, we chose weapons purposely for that reason as well, to be able to give that contrast. So in that sense, it wasn't a coincidence, It was like, well, okay, PGI had their turn with finally doing some changes to the game, which hadn't happened in years. Those changes were not received well by the community. Okay, well let's also focus on weapons. Weapons are a great one to start with anyway.
Sure.
Let's also focus on weapons, and let's see if we can get better responses. Now, overwhelmingly, we have, especially in comparison. I did a very small, analysis before even the patch dropped, and the so-called approval rating was around 90% for being positive. A lot of those are, a significant portion of that, of course, was like, overall it's great, except I have these concerns.
Sure.
I counted those as being positive. I only really count the negatives as like, this sounds horrible, or they were mainly negative posts. And of course, me being involved in it, I have bias.
Sure.
So as the amount of bias I might have, you could say 5%, 10%, it doesn't matter. If you're looking at a 90% approval rating, even with a very large amount of bias, it's still overwhelmingly positive. In comparison to the March patch, which was overwhelming negative. It's like, you can mess with the statistics and approvals as much as you want.
Sure.
The fact remains, March was negative, April was positive.
Sure.
And, I definitely am not going to say, like 100% everything we did was awesome.
Sure.
Because you can't achieve that.
Sure.
But I'm very happy personally with how it's turned out and the amount of feedback we're giving, and I think so I agree with you. It was in a way a blessing in disguise. But was it completely coincidental that it happened exactly how it was? Was there some thoughts in the back of people's minds that had made it move that way? I don't know. I'm not privy to their inside thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know.
But maybe there was something more going on as well. That's not to be.
Yeah, how hard is it? Because like I look at, is there any other PV? Like, legitimately, I'm asking. Like, it's not difficult balancing the weapons because you have so many variables and so many mechs. Like, can one mech just like ruin like, I don't know. Like, I'm asking you, like, how hard is it from your perspective of, because your guys' goal is to make every weapon system have a place. You don't not necessarily be like, you just don't want, and I feel like you guys have done a really good job. Like, there hasn't been one weapon system that's just like became king. Like, legitimately, like I can't off this past.
That's my perspective as well. I feel that a lot more weapons are viable, and I feel that there's no one overpowered, take this and you're always going to win weapon either. As to how difficult it is, I think it's very difficult. Personally, I think it's hard. It really is. It's a very complex system, and there's a lot of variables.
Yeah.
And especially when you can't live test anything.
Yeah.
Like that's honestly quite scary, not being able to test anything. You've sort of got to, you test it in the limited way you can. You can do offline testing.
Yep.
And you can, of course, do the old balance by spreadsheet. I think the only reason it's been successful is because of the amount of experience that people in the Cauldron have. And so, it's I won't talk about anyone else's experience. Some people have more experience than me in the game. I have, I think, well over 10,000 hours playing this game, which is an enormous amount. It's insanely amount. It's my hobby, and I find, I always, of course, look at having a good, life balance. So I'm a very sporty person as well. I play a lot of sports. I have a career, family, so I always make sure I'm balancing my life. But I do have an extensive amount of time playing the game, and at quite a high level, a very successful level. And it's still difficult for me. It's not easy to look at it all and go, well, some things are obvious, yes. Other things aren't obvious.
Yeah.
Some things, even with all that experience, you can look at, and as you said, someone else with as much or more experience will have a different perspective. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm right and the other person's wrong. It's not the way it is, but it's not an easy thing. And I don't think there's any right or wrong answer, in an absolute sense either.
Sure.
I don't think you can look at it and go, okay, this weapon's overpowered if it has this number completely compared to this number.
Yeah.
Because there's so many variables going on.
Yeah. Well, I think you guys did a great job as far as releasing a patch. Nothing became dominant. It's not like we've seen in the past where small pulse lasers and you just saw Arctic cheetahs just dominating, or piranhas just going around. They're still dangerous, but you can still put them in your place, or ERPPCs before March, February, you saw the 3-peep Veagle. It's still out there. You're seeing it. But then you're also seeing large pulse being used, and ER large is being used, and other autocannons. Yeah, oh Jesus! I remember the first match I had, and I had peeps. I was blown away about how quick they fired, and I was like, oh yeah, this is what they used to be like. Just that month
from
of
the March,
the Dark Age. That.
But in saying that, clan PPCs were incredibly dominant in the March patch,
and they were already dominant prior,
the March patch made them better.
Yeah, but
every sense essentially.
But that's where I feel like it just reinforces that, how out of touch Chris was, because he, in his paragraph that he had on his the patch notes, and I'm just being critical here, his definition of what he was trying to do, and it obviously was not even close of the IS. Everybody experimented the first few days with ISPPCs, and then it was clan PPCs everywhere. It was as far as you can see, Simba. You own this, that's what I'm saying. It's
yes. And well, they were, to be fair as well, they were accidentally overtuned.
Yes, they were.
Yeah. So there was a little mistake which made them even better than they should have been.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway.
So I feel like you guys have done a good job. What interests me the most is agility and mechs feeling agile. Obviously, we have confirmation that is actually happening with the May patch. You guys just posted.
Well, I will clarify that it's not completely locked into May.
Okay.
Not 100%. Yeah.
Okay, so
hopefully we will have it locked in soon, but it's not 100%. It's definitely in May. We're good to go.
Darren, don't mess this up. I'm holding you to it. All right.
Well, there's a lot of things that go into it, of course. But
who do we need to sacrifice? Bearclaw? He's I don't.
Yeah. Right. So it is not 100% locked in. We've released the stats because from the Cauldron's perspective, we've completed our side of what we want it to look like, and we've released it for feedback.
And to be fair, Darren and Matt are consumed, if you guys don't know, with Mech 5 release on Xbox,
it's being released
Steam, and GOG.
and Steam and everything now.
I know he has been hounded about the Steam packs, and basically said is we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough manpower, and I quote, we'd rather focus on the patch and getting stuff in instead of just selling you stuff. So that was his response to that. And I'm assuming they're just swamped. So maybe cross our fingers.
Yeah. No, I've had a fair few meetings with Darren and Matt, in particular Darren recently. And yeah, he's an extremely busy person by no fault of his own. He has very good intentions, and I was definitely apprehensive when it was announced he was the new community manager.
Sure.
I didn't know him very well. And, there was sort of a thing, we've got a big update. And it's like, it's a new community manager. And it was sort of like, everyone was sort of like, well, great, awesome.
Yeah. The shill is back.
But,
right?
Yeah, but in that sense, I think he's done a great job so far with the amount of resources he has. And at the end of the day, it comes down to PGI. They need to spend more money. They need to devote more resources if they want it to be successful.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to at the end of the day. But they, of course, have to make a business decision.
Yeah, I
they have to make it. They want to just like maintenance mode sort of improve it, or do they want to literally improve it? And is from a business perspective, is that effective? Is it going to be like, you have to do a cost analysis on that sort of thing.
Yeah. But what's weird is you have Darren say that the Striker pack has outsold the last pack that they did, which was the Dervish, right? He said that online. He said it's been very well received.
I didn't know that, so that's
also
hear, I suppose, in a way.
Yeah, and to be fair, the Striker mechs are actually okay. They're not bad with the quirks they were given from you guys, and then just the overall value. If you like the direction of like, hey, they're doing weapon balance changes from the community. Hey, they're doing May, or hopefully May agility, but even if it's not all May, they're going in this direction. I think it's good value. $20, go spend. Yeah, sure. If you got $20, you want to support that behavior. My issue is, I still question. I don't know if the motive is the correct term, not from Darren or Matt, but from like, Darren and Matt, they have to say the words that, HR is doing the best they can. We're bringing people as quickly as it can. We got Mech 5 Illumin over, and I get that. But the little guy on my shoulder is still going of, is Russ just basically is he not milking it? Is that do you get what I'm trying to say? Is like,
yeah, well, I can verbalize it, I suppose, from my perspective.
Yeah, okay, let's see. Let's
kind of get at.
Yeah.
So, as we all know, PGI was bought by a publicly listed company. Yeah. And as a part of the deal, when you're bought by a publicly listed company, suddenly a lot of your documents are now public because the company's publicly listed. And so we can all see the documents, and as part of that sale, there is a performance bonus.
Yep. 60 million Canadian.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So there's a big performance bonus for hitting certain markers. So for me, as totally, this is my hobby. I'm not associated with anyone or anything, so I can speak my mind and say what I want. Is PGI just in making sure they get their performance bonus?
Yeah.
And then once they get their performance bonus, are we going to see, great, we got our bonus, let's do our other stuff?
Yeah.
That's the fear in my mind.
Yeah. That sums it up, because like,
so yeah.
So
I suppose just to add to that, given that I think that is a possibility, even if it's a very negative thought pattern, this is therefore an opportunity to stabilize the game into something better than it was stabilized in before.
Yep.
So if we do get another downturn or a closing of shop type of situation, and then the game's eventually going to peter out X, Y, and Z, be all negative about that. People have been talking about the death of the game since 2013, whatever. Sure. I still enjoy the game. I'll still keep playing it, I don't know for how long, if production stops again, whatever, you never know the future. But this seems like a perfect opportunity for me and the community to, if there is going to be another closed shop in the future, whether it's next year or in 5 years of the track, at least we can get it to a better position than it was before.
And enjoy it for the next 5 years.
So it won't be wasted. Yeah, so it won't be wasted effort.
100% agree. 100% agree. Yeah. You said it correctly, because I just couldn't form the words, because like there's that fear of, are they just doing this to get the incentive of the bonus? Obviously, Mech 5 coming out, Xbox, Steam. Look, we know it did well enough to where the public company, like you said, EG7, said it sold hundreds of thousands. So even if you took the lowest number there, hundreds, which is plural, which is 200, you know it made a good enough money. And then whatever EGS gave them to be exclusive, so forth and so on. And I think we still got a better product, even the state of the game, than we would have if they would have just released at said point in time. But it's about to hit Steam. It's about to hit Xbox and GOG. And so we know it's going to at least sell. Like, there are people that are waiting for it on those platforms. What we don't know right now is we don't know if they, outside of just Heroes of the Inner Sphere, we don't know what they've done. Have they done the story, the storytelling? We just don't know. No one knows. And I would suspect it's May. It releases May 27th. Suspect hopefully with the next few weeks, we'd get some marketing material that Darren keeps touting. Marketing is actually being done. So I would assume. Yep. All that being said, I wonder and I question, does Russ see value in, if it does well, will they go back to Microsoft and ask for an extension to where because right now they have 4.5 years, maybe 4.5.
Yeah, they got their 5-year extension.
Right.
Yeah,
that's not enough time. He said it's not enough time to basically, he quoted 10 million, whatever, blah, 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 to make a new product. And it doesn't have to be MW 2.0. It could just be Mech 5 Online or what, I don't know. Living Legends is doing their mod. It'll probably be a few years before we see anything major out of that. But I just wonder, are they waiting to see the performance of that and the sales of that before they dedicate anything towards the future of online mech play? That's we just don't know.
Well, I mean, you can just look at Mechwarrior Online and, people for whatever. So regardless of what anyone will say, Mechwarrior Online was profitable.
Sure.
And it may not have been as successful as it could have been, but it was to some certain extent successful. It was a successful product. Yeah. So that's at the end of the day, it made money.
Well, yeah,
and it was successful as a product. Now, what you need to look at as a business is, can it be as successful as you want it to be in the future if we work on another project of similar sort? Or you need to look at the option, and it's purely business, as all game development is. At the end of the day, the businesses, they do it, it's money. Money comes. Yeah. It's the same with movies. People can have passion about movies and making them, and that definitely helps in their production. But when it comes down to it, you want to make a movie, you need it to be profitable. You need a producer to back it, to make it happen.
Yeah.
So it needs to be able to be profitable.
Yeah. And then the other, the elephant in the room is they are working on new IP. We don't know anything about it. That's where, again, I don't know, man. Like, I'm super stoked for what you guys are doing. I'm excited for the agility. I'm excited to have the conversation about group queue, because I feel like that potentially will have a big impact. Obviously, one thing we haven't really talked about is, because I think it's way too early to have a conversation about Solaris and faction play. I feel like there's a lot of possibilities and solutions there as far as the systems that they created. But what I feel like is you have to be pretty damn sure whatever is suggested isn't just a you don't end up with the same result they did when they released Solaris sort of thing, where it's literally dead within the first day of the game mode. And then faction play, I feel like, is the reason I brought up earlier the conversation during group was, if you're looking for just a sort of balanced but fun, solos and small group, and that's what quick play is. It's for quick matches. It's quick play. It's in the name, quick play. But we also recognize that there's some issues with balance, so we're going to reduce group size. We're going to have multiple groups. Solos are going to be involved. We're not going to have to worry about Oceanic because everything's just one thing. Well, where does that leave big group play? And that's where I sort of feel like faction play has to be, call it whatever you want, take the name away, faction play, and call it group play, call it faction, whatever, I don't know, whatever it is. But that's where you go for either 4-mans, 8-mans, 12-mans. Obviously, a lot of people enjoy the respawn mechanic, so that maybe is something you base your game modes around. And you've got, again, if they made a Living Legends Conquest-esque, I would be addicted like crack. Like, I know, because I used to play that game back in the day. Like, I know that game mode. But I feel like that's where they have to answer, is what is outside of just...
and I mean, there's a lot of ways you could go. The whole concept of Solaris was in Mechwarrior 4.
Yeah.
It was sort of, it was free for all was the big drawing card, right? Unfortunately, the way this game was base coded back in the day, it was base coded to have just two teams under consideration. Yeah. So that was their roadblock there. Should they have anticipated that 1v1s and 2v2s would not last? Probably yes. Should they have devoted that much resource to just have a 1v1, 2v2 mode? No, they shouldn't have.
Yeah.
They literally rebranded their game on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it was dead with
that's why like
amount of times.
Maybe that's also too is like, does Russ feel a little bit of jadedness when he's like, yeah, there's no business left in MWO, right? Because like, and it's like, all you had to do was just work with your community. Like, all you had to do was ask about skill tree before you even pushed it out there, and you would have saved yourself thousands of players of leaving the game. All you would have to do is just ask, like, hey, here's our proposal for Solaris, or just ask, hey, community, what are your best solutions for Solaris? What are you guys feeling? Sort of like,
Yeah, I do. I believe there was some limited community involvement in Solaris.
Really?
Very limited from my knowledge. I definitely weren't a part of that. And I think, I mean, you can look back at the history of this game and say, they've made many wrong turns.
Yeah.
That's something you can very easily do. But that's looking back retroactively, of course.
Yeah.
It's always easy to look at the past and say, like, this person made this mistake. That's very easy.
Yeah, that's easy. Yeah.
Rather than looking forward. It's always more difficult. Yeah. But in saying that, and you can criticize Russ even in particular as a person, all you want. He's been very successful.
Yeah.
For lack of, like, for any measurement you can have. He created a company and he sold it for a lot of money.
Yeah.
And he's produced the game that, from my knowledge, is the game he wanted to produce, which is really Mech 5.
Yeah.
He couldn't do that back in the day, which I think is why we ended up with, the free-to-play model Mechwarrior Online. I'm pretty sure he's even said this, like it was almost like a stepping stone.
Yep.
Right?
They wanted to do Mech 5 from the start. That's what he
wanted.
Yeah,
and in that sense, the stepping stone was successful. He managed to generate enough profit from Mechwarrior Online to create the product that he was really after, which was Mech 5. And now, maybe it's not as successful as it could have been, but it seems to be successful. It's being released on Xbox. It's being released on Steam. It's been already sold X amount of copies, which has meant, that a public listed company has bought the private listed company that he created. And
I feel like you said at the very beginning of this podcast, which is I personally feel like there's plenty of people that will continue buying stuff for MWO and supporting the game to where
you said yourself, the Striker Pack has shown that already.
That's Darren said that on stream. He said it's outsold the Dervish Pack, and so that begs the question of, I think there's just more life out of the game that if those decisions
as we started this, as I said, RuneScape has done exactly this. They revived it, and it's pretty much better than it's ever been.
Yeah,
it's more popular, and I presume I presume it would be more profitable than ever.
Yeah. If you were, let me flip the question. If you had a magic wand, would you upgrade MWO and just take what we currently have to Unreal, or would you create a new game, maybe a Mech 5 Online, and it is slightly like, what would you do?
What would I do? As you've probably noticed, I'm a very rational person.
Sure.
It's very difficult for me to make a proper judgment call what I would do without actually knowing the numbers behind the scenes.
No, I'm saying magical. Like, what would Kras want? What would you want
What would I want as a player, not as a business person?
Yeah, because knowing all the faults.
Which aspect are you asking me? Are you asking me what would I do as Russ?
You
Or
had a
were you
magic
asking me
wand.
what a
You had a
magic wand I could
wand.
just?
I don't know.
From my perspective, though, it'll affect me like as a player.
Yes.
I suppose. Yep. What would I do? Yeah, I mean, I would continue to work on Mechwarrior Online without devoting a huge amount of resources to it. Like, I'm not talking like, I'm not going to create a huge new development team for Mechwarrior Online. I'll see how it goes. If it continues to be successful, then I will say, okay, we're going to continue to do small things to Mechwarrior Online, and we're going to develop something with Unreal Engine. Yeah, that's what I'd say. So I wouldn't devote huge amount of resources to Mechwarrior Online as it is, because it's a very old engine. And I don't know, I'm definitely not a coder, but from what I've heard from people who are, it's a bit of a shit fight, for lack of a better word, and it's all messed up. So I would work on doing the same sort of probably model, some sort of free-to-play model, whether you'd base that around Mechwarrior 5 or you just use the same engine and create, something different, Mechwarrior Online 2. But, I mean, you've already got all the assets there. The very system... I haven't played very much Mechwarrior 5, quite honestly, because I'm very much like I don't derive as much, I suppose, pleasure playing against the computer. I like playing against other people.
Yep.
Most of the time. I used to be a competitive chess player back in the day and things like that. The system of Mechwarrior 5 already has like this sort of like setup that is what seemed to be envisioning faction play to be, but in a multiplayer sense. It's already got like it seems to me they've done like a single player experience of more what the concept of faction play was originally, right?
Yeah.
Which never was realized in this game.
Yeah.
So I don't see why you wouldn't try and develop that. There's a lot of very successful games like EVE Online, which use like a persistent universe type of thing. That seems like it is something you could do. So my magic wand would be realize the proper concept of faction play. So focus the game around that, because essentially Mechwarrior Online is an arena shooter. You could say, it's a simulator or whatever as well, whatever you want. But at the end of the day, it's like there's no persistent universal things to do. You collect the mechs you want, and then you drop into like an instance.
Yeah.
You shoot them. Once that instance is over, it's over. That's it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So I would, my magic wand, I'd wave it and say, okay, well, I suppose at the end of the day, what I'm saying is here's Mechwarrior Online 2, based on Unreal Engine, with a persistent sort of faction play universe based on, like the actual inner sphere, like the universe. So then you do so many different things, right? You're engaging the people who love the lore of it. You've got an actual universe now for them. You can move like the very competitive-minded people over to being competitive within that sort of system. You can properly realize what faction play should have been. That's probably the magic wand that I would wave. That would be the result.
And it's interesting you bring that up, because we still have not heard whether or not we'll have crossplay. We don't have crossplay between the EGS and Game Pass for Microsoft. We don't have that right now. And we have not heard and or haven't been told. I suspect it might be part of their marketing. Again, I don't know. That's something we're going to have to like cross our fingers for. But I feel like if there has to be crossplay. If they don't have crossplay, it is... I don't even know. Anyway, my point being is like if they have crossplay,
these days and age, everything's crossplay to my knowledge. Isn't it?
And that's what Microsoft wants that. But like again, the Xbox, like I just wonder now if you're proposing there's mods and they have the same game. I think you may have a bigger population. I mean, just think about it. What you just said. You give MWO enough resources where it keeps going for a while. You basically placate the population until they can basically be moved over to this new Mech 5 Online. You have to buy Mech 5 maybe to even use it. Maybe not. Maybe it's sort of like Warzone, where you can play the online portion free, and if you want the other stuff, you have to buy it.
Well, StarCraft 2, a game I used to play quite extensively, and I still play a little bit, has moved to that model now. You can play like StarCraft 2 multiplayer for free, but you got to buy the campaign if you want to play the single player experience. They could do the same thing with Mech 5.
And now you've got maybe 1 million people playing or have bought the game on Xbox and Steam and GOG, and now you've got the PC player base. Again, I don't know. Maybe now you have a bigger audience than the biggest audience you ever had in MWO. Now you have a bigger audience just in Mech 5, just to basically smash and have multiple, crossplay. Opportunities. I like the business perspective. I look at that as like, yeah, that's great, because then all of them are playing against each other. You don't have buckets, and buckets are bad, right?
Yeah.
So
buckets are bad.
Yeah, buckets are bad. Oh my gosh, it's hilarious.
Interesting concept, isn't it? It all comes around, right?
Yeah, right. Splitting your player base if they can do it. I don't know. We haven't heard anything. Me, Nutty, Starwolf, and Violent did that promo for Mech 5 and the new game mode. And that's it. Like, so I don't know.
We'll have to see, won't we?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm presuming that PGI don't necessarily know either for a lot of this stuff, right? If you're going to look at, cost analysis and looking forward of plans, usually you'll have a few different models of plans of eventualities that you could pursue, right?
They'll have DLC
and that would depends on, again, coming down to money and popularity. Has it go well? Does it not go well? Is there feasibility in doing this project? Is it going to take too much resources to try and do that with too little cost? There's all those business perspectives inside of things that really need to be fleshed out. And at the end of the day, I think they've done well so far with Mechwarrior Online in terms of trying to revive it with the limited resource they have. Should they have put more resources into it? Should they have not abandoned it in the first place? Those are different concepts that, you could say yes or no to. Most people would say, yeah, they should have, blah, blah, blah. But end of the day, I think so far it's been going well. And I'm positive for the future of it. But I'm also realistic in that if it all falls apart again in the future, I don't think the effort that I've put in personally, or the effort the community has put in, or the Cauldron's put in, will be futile.
Sure.
We've got an April patch in with weapon balances that I think is an improvement over what we had for a few years. Is it perfect? No, but is it an improvement? Yes, I do.
And you're making changes next month, and you're going to be making
small
little changes
being rolled out
next month.
But right, even right now, just say
just
randomly it's done, finished. I think at least that April patch being in is an improvement.
Sure.
For me, it is at least. And of course, I work directly on it, so it's.
I don't think
that's a huge amount of bias. But
I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're right.
I don't think it's going to happen at all. But it's.
So
what I'm getting at least, I think the efforts aren't futile in that sense.
And I think it's exciting. Like I said, I think I can't wait to hear your guys' discussion as far as group and solo. Solaris, can you guys what's the community's consensus on that? Because I feel like there's some solutions out there. I feel like faction play can be completely reworked. What is that? Again, I don't know. I think some of that ties into
so many directions you could go into.
I do have one question I guess I'll ask before we wrap this up. Is if you could wave your wand, would you do a time jump to it would actually be Dark Age period. Would you do a time jump Dark Age period next year if you could wave your wand?
Does it have to go all the way to Dark Age?
Jihad and then Dark Age. But
it could be Jihad first.
Sure, you could do seasons.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess would you do a time jump? Do you for me, I look at it on the outside as all other games that do new stuff, it usually is a bonus, right? Is that
okay.
New toys?
Yeah, I mean, I do enjoy the lore very much. I do have to admit that when it comes to Jihad and Dark Age, I'm very much behind. So I know a lot of the lore, and especially the Star League era, is way back in the past. In a lore sense, is one of my favorite timelines. And then as I go forward, I lose less and less of my my deep knowledge, I suppose. So it's hard to make an informed decision from that perspective. But I do know that there is technology in the current timeline, like weapons and things, that we don't have in the game that we could implement first. That would be easier to implement. So like things like light ACs, light AC2s, light AC5s. Hags, which may be difficult to balance but could be implemented. There's different weapons that you could put in the game without needing a time jump necessarily.
Yeah.
And there is still plenty of mechs.
Yeah.
And good mechs, like from a competitive sense and from a a hype, just a hype sense.
Yeah.
There are mechs that could be worthwhile, that I'll say are worthwhile, that could be implemented in the game that are in the current timeline too.
IS Omnis could happen. We didn't even talk about rescale.
But IS Omnis are a difficult one, right? Because of you can't make them the same as Clan Omnis. They have to be a little bit different to be usable. But anyway, yeah. No, so timeline jumps are always fun. I think the amount of resources you might need to devote to that might not necessarily be I think there's a lot more important stuff.
Sure.
That you could focus on before you do a timeline jump. And new content, definitely you can do new content within the current timeline.
Sure.
Mechs, new weapons,
Well, I think
I think all that stuff's more important first.
Yeah, like I said, I think I agree. I mean, again, rescale weapons that are currently there, game modes again can be rehashed, maps. It's funny because like some of that stuff doesn't necessarily always tie into each other. It's not like an if or then. Like it's like you can do
a few different things, right?
Yeah, I mean, even the trouble of like right now, like even if you want to introduce new mechs, well, you've got Mark Nicholson. Well, is he working on a new pack? Then he can't do that because he's working on the like bolt-ons. Well,
presumably he'll be doing the clan version of the striker pack, right?
Right. But then it's like, okay, well, rescale, can he do it himself? Then I mean, it's one of those things where, at the end of the day, you said something earlier that I think I just question over and over, and I wonder why we haven't got an answer. But I think it's because of Mech 5, and it's when will Russ dedicate more resources, and I get it. Their business. You don't just throw money at something that but and they're full steam ahead on Mech 5. I understand that, but I'm an MWO player, so it's just one of those. It's like, exactly. That's a cool story, but
for me, the Mech 5 release is exciting. Not for the Mech 5 release, but the fact that we could get a big influx of players.
You're right.
Mech 5 release.
Yeah. And I'm excited for it. I'll play it. Obviously, I'll be streaming it, but it's one of those things where it's like I ended up back at MWO. Someone asked me.
I probably won't even play it.
Well, yeah. Someone asked me.
I'm even more in that MWO camp.
Yeah. Someone was like, "Could you stream? Can you stream Mech 5 daily?" And I was like, "Right now, no. Like you could to a very small audience, but I think that says enough." Mm-hmm. So yeah. But
I mean, I sometimes watch your stream, not very much, but I do sometimes watch it. But I definitely won't watch it if you're streaming Mech 5.
Understood. Don't.
No.
Yeah.
That's no criticism on yourself, of course. But that's just the reality.
Yeah.
Like I'll watch you play Mechwarrior Online, but I definitely won't bother when it's Mech 5.
I'm not saying there's 100% correlation, but the amount of streamers you have and the activity of Twitch viewers for an online game is pretty indicative of a population as well. I'm not saying it's 100% correlation, but when you have individuals like Bear Duel and Beef and coming back and actually
BattleTech, correct me if I'm wrong, the BattleTech game, and sorry for interrupting.
No.
The BattleTech game is decently popular, right?
Yes.
Especially compared to Mech 5 in terms of Twitch, I presume.
Well, in Bear Duel, Bear Duel streams that regularly with.
Yeah, I've seen him get very large numbers of people.
Yeah. And his numbers
comparatively, of course, to Mech.
Yeah, his numbers come from that he's a good YouTuber. If you want to be a good Twitch streamer, you have to be a good YouTuber. The thing what's interesting is there's a lot of people that like that PvE element, and I think HPS BattleTech does a really good job of that, especially with the mod scene, because they just took off. So you can you
This
have
seems
that,
like rogue tech, right? Yeah.
yeah, and you have that power and power dynamic where you can, there's still that edge of, you can still lose a pilot or lose a piece of equipment. So there's still that edge of like, you know, vulnerability and the chance of something, you're losing something, but then also you have the chance of salvaging that Timby or the salvaging that direwolf or that weapon, and it's really good. Like that thing, that godlike power that you get in BattleTech, where you have that in those mods. And you know, as far as their Reddit, I know they have higher numbers on Reddit as far as their overall, and again, I don't know if there's correlation there. There's obviously a large audience that watches videos for BattleTech, but I think it's also just a different settings. No one plays multiplayer on it. Go figure. They wasted all that time in development.
I remember I met someone. I met a person in MechCon 2018, and he was like the number one like multiplayer, like the number one ranked person in multiplayer for the BattleTech game. I remember that. Yeah,
I've never.
So I was there. I was at
yeah.
MechCon 2018 as a competitor, you know, for Mechwarrior Online, and I was talking to, like, you know, there's a few different people at the table, and this guy just said, like, yeah, like I'm here as like I'm the. It's, well, he didn't really say, you know, he wasn't full of himself. He didn't say I'm the best, but he was like, yeah, I'm here because I'm
sort of a big deal. Yeah, I'm sort of a big deal, you know, like, you know, like,
he's a really nice guy. I can't even remember his name now, but that was really surprising because, like, oh, like, that's cool. But yeah, I didn't know if there was any scene at all.
No, there's no scene. There's no scene. And if there is, I apologize, but if
maybe there's some very small niche scene.
If you don't know about it and I don't know about it, then obviously, like, I'm just gonna toss it out there. Then it's not newsworthy. It's like when someone's,
it must be very niche. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like someone's like, well, I really like Solaris. I'm like,
you could describe that with MWO.
Yeah. I'm like, well, no one plays Solaris. So subjectively, if it was fun, there would be people playing it. So yeah. I think the problem with it is again, it comes down to BattleTech hits a niche that I think, and a scratch that a lot of BattleTech fans wanted. I'm disappointed that we're not getting a 2, or at least not anytime soon. That, you know, Mitch did say all things in success, and you never say never. I feel like BattleTech. Do you play it at all, or did you get it at all, or?
I bought it and I gave it a go. For me, I definitely think it was a good game. I didn't get involved in it very much, but for me, one of my all-time favorite games is Mech Commander.
Yep.
So BattleTech was great, but it was turn-based, and so it just didn't live up to the Mech Commander side of me, and which sort of ruined it in a way, even though it could be really good.
Let me ask you, have you played Mech Commander Mercenaries?
No, because I don't own Mechwarrior 5.
Gotcha, okay.
But maybe with the Steam release,
well,
I'll look into it.
Maybe.
But I have been looking at your development.
We haven't. Exciting for me. We haven't done anything for 9 months because literally Tori has had, didn't have a pregnant wife, has a pregnant wife. They're having the baby before we even get the game, the DLC, and so it's one of those where we've been waiting. You know.
Yeah.
The only problem I have with Mech Commander Mercenaries is that we haven't had the tools, obviously, in a very long time, because I can forgive because of COVID and things slowing down. I get it. Mm-hmm. But I think the reality of it is just, I think the Xbox took a lot more resources than they anticipated, and that's why we got all the delays. But I would love to do a more detailed Mech Commander experience, and some of the stuff that we want to do sort of splits away, because right now it's basically Mech 5 RTS. And what we want to do is make it a Mech Commander, and we have a lot of cool
make it a proper
but then you have to have campaigns. You got to look at story and development, and are you going to do characters and like all these things. Yeah. They have a really cool system, and there's a lot of tools. Unfortunately, some of that stuff too is you know, it's a lot of work. Like, people don't like, there's a complete mission documentation process now. PGI released that. That's the only thing they've released. That's another side that we don't have any, you know, like, no one even knows. Like, there are some there's 2 mod teams that I know of. obviously Living Legends being one of them that's doing their own mechs. Well, there's no documentation. So like, why? Like, you need that out there. You need to be able, how do you get a tank or a vehicle? How do you get a character? Like, all this needs to be documented. And I think you'd see a lot more success, but you have to learn Unreal Engine. And I think that's a big roadblock for the mod scene, which is like, it's super powerful, but you have to learn. It's not like back in the day.
Whole engine as opposed to having a proper, an easier accessible tool.
You don't have the Mech Commander map edit, tool that back in the day, or like almost like a Shadowrun. You don't have that. It's not in a nice little box where you do stuff. But like, I would love to do a I mean, if PGI was ever, like, hey, what do you guys, like, let's see if we can come up with a business plan. I'm sure me and Tori would love to sit down and be like,
more than a mod, sort of, so to speak.
Yeah, because like, let's just say, I mean, if you only have 4.5 years, or whatever, 4.5 years, or even if you don't, even if you get extended, like, I think there's a significant amount of people that would love a new Mech Commander. But I also feel like, again, you have to...
I presume so. Yeah, again, I don't know how much of a market there actually is, and whether you would be like, sort of not so much stepping on the toes of BattleTech, but whether there would...
But do you care? Because they're out of the game.
No, like, you wouldn't care stepping on the toes, but I mean, would there be too much competition from that for it to be...
I don't think,
feasible,
because
I suppose
if HBS would have stayed in the game, maybe, but even then, they're different. It's a turn-based.
What ended up happening to them?
They got bought by Paradox.
I remember that now. Yeah,
and then they're working on 2 titles. We don't, as far as right now, I don't know anything about them. Mitch wouldn't talk about them when I did the podcast with them.
Presumably, they're BattleTech related.
Nope,
they're not.
None.
Okay.
None. Yeah, so it's sort of like the PGI new IP thing. We, makes sense, by the way. And we also still don't know.
Yeah, of course. Diversifying your portfolio.
Yeah,
right.
You don't have to go to Microsoft and beg for, an extension, right? Like, you have control over it, or I should say EG7 now has control over it, or whatever. And we also don't know if that was originally PGI's idea or if that was EG7 and just allowed them. Again, I don't know. But also too is, like, to clarify, you went to documentation earlier. It didn't make PGI necessarily wealthy from the buyout. It made the shareholders wealthy. It's clear, like, they made, they got a lot of payouts as well. So like, and I don't know who the large majority of shareholders are. I would guess it was probably Russ.
Well, no one knows because it was a private company, right?
Like,
it's not publicly listed.
But yeah, I think Mech Commander has a special place, but I feel like what's missing out with Mech 5 and even Mech Commander is like, story actually matters. Like, the idea of like a persistent universe, I know we're totally gone off on a tangent here, is you have to have so much content to make it not feel samesies, repetitive. Like, like, that's what I feel like in Mech 5. It's like, it literally doesn't matter that you have this map. You could have literally just given me a list of job A, job B, job C. Oh, I got to travel. Okay, whatever. Like, you don't even
part
care.
Of the whole mercenaries concept, right? Like, as opposed to, like, if it was Mechwarrior 5 without the mercenaries part, you would expect it to be very much more campaign driven, like previous Mechwarriors have been. The mercenaries, like, attachment to it is sort of, it gives it that concept.
No, I don't know, because like,
no,
I feel like that's what's missing, is because like when you read think about this. I mean, it's not just the Mechwarriors. I mean, you've got medical staff, you have personnel, you have cooks, you have logistics. Like, you have, again, for every fighter, for every Marine on the battlefield, you have like 10 plus Marines behind him, and multiply that, it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah, you've got support staff and everything. Yeah,
like, and when you don't have that, when you don't have any type of connection to it, you don't have any connection to your, like, pilots as well. Like, you just don't, there's no, and it's also a fault of HBS BattleTech. Again, there are some comparisons, like, you can do to both games that I feel like I was hoping that PGI would have, and maybe they would have if they would have had more money. I think the reality of it is we got the game what we got because of whether people like to hear it or not. It's just money.
As I was saying before, it comes down to money at the end of the day.
Like,
how much you can, how far you can stretch the money that you do have or you're willing to spend. Yeah.
So I'm hoping it gets better, but I feel like Mech Commander, to me, I don't know how to put my finger on it. I love Mech Commander. I didn't, and Darkest Hour. I didn't necessarily like Mech Commander 2
Yeah,
for
I'm
the
the same.
graphic fidelity. Because it was that awkward, like,
Mech Commander Gold for me
oh
was
yeah,
was my favorite version. Just
gritty.
that, just yeah,
Yeah, like I still,
had a simplicity about it that was
yeah.
also that was nice. Yeah.
And I feel like that can be expanded and that's sort of like one of the things I talked to Tori about when it comes to Mech Commander Mercenaries is like it's like the Mech Lab too. Is we're sort of we're not doing MWO's Mech Lab, but we're also not doing Mech 5's Mech Lab. We're gonna actually do sort of a throwback to Mech 4 because
Hmm.
like when you break it down, like if you live in the BattleTech universe, like you would just add like you don't have crits. Like there's no crits on a battle. It's like me saying there's a crit on a M1A1. What are you talking about? Like there's no crit space, right? There's a mount for a 240 next to the main gun. Like, that's what I'm saying. Is like what happens in Mech 4, I think what they did is they saw the limitations of Mech 3 and Mech 2, which is basically the tabletop build rules. That's why variants don't matter. Like
You
so
just threw anything. The,
you
the
just threw
mechs in
anything.
MechWarrior 3, it's like you
Yeah.
just put whatever on them.
Mech Online, they took a step forward and they went back to the hardpoint system, but they took a step backward in a way because, in my opinion, because the crit system, like, why am I putting ammo in legs? That's fucking stupid. And Mech 4 didn't do
Yeah,
that. They basically said, oh, you want more ammo? You just tick the up box on your weapon and it decreases by a ton and you get more. Like, that makes sense, right? Like, it's this weird nuance of this.
yeah. It's strange if you've got if you've got a weapon in your like right shoulder that you have ammo in your left foot.
Yeah, it's
That's
stupid.
a very
Yeah.
strange. I could just
Especially,
imagine like someone drawing it conceptually. You've just got like all
you
this
can't.
ammo goings that are everywhere.
Yeah, you can't because like, and that doesn't even it. The problem with that is when people try to justify it, it's like you need to stop because all that is a tabletop build rule. Someone made that for the tabletop so you can build stuff. But from a lore perspective, it absolutely makes no sense. Like there's like
Yeah.
that's not a thing. So yeah, we also too with Mech 5 that I have an issue with is like there's no distinction between mechs. Like a Marauder is a Marauder. There's no like old Marauder that has these weird like. So they have a quirk system coming out with the Heroes in their Spheres. So we were thinking is like maybe you find a Marauder that's just beat to shit. It's old. It's gonna have some like serious negative stuff that's happening to it, but you're still going to want it because it's a Marauder and you can take it and spend the money to get rid of some of those some of them might be temporary, like you take them out on mission or whatever. Some might be permanent and you have to take it to go get fixed, but it's going to cost money and time. Isn't it willing? Or you just take the Marauder and it's a Marauder and it's better than, whatever.
I wonder how many similarities there will be between like the quirks in Mechwarrior Online and Mechwarrior 5 Heroes of the Innisphere.
Yeah, I don't know.
Whether they'll be
We don't
like
know.
you'll see some of the exact same quirks we've had in the past or not.
Well,
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, like I said, it's
It's a single player game, so it's different balance, of
yeah.
course. Very different balance.
I like their quest system. I just feel like I want like when I play other modern games, and this is where I'm spoiled on one hand, and I feel like our games deserve more. That's not a slight, it's just reality. When you go and play other modern games and you're like, oh man, like why can't we have a story of main character with the dialogue? Like, you see all the facial just expressions that now are captured in story and riveting and pulls your heart out and you're like, oh, you're rooting for the bad guy, rooting for the whatever it is. And then you play Mech 5 and it's just like, oh, okay, big stuff for robots, and you're like,
I remember seeing some meme videos where it's like it looked like they were trying to make the mechs be like expressive. Like the mechs themselves were characters.
oh yeah, funny. that was the intro. Like, oh my god,
yeah. I haven't played. I have barely played this.
And
game.
It was like
I played it actually in MechCon 2018.
Mechon, yeah.
That was the main place.
It was like that stereotypical like the king crab is like, do you really want to do this? Like this is how. And then of course you have this hunchback that's like this, yeah, like and just the dialogue and then the animations and like.
You look sort of corny.
Yeah, and that's fair criticism when you look at something like Titanfall 2. Like, you play that, yeah, it's only 5 hours. And yeah, there was a bigger budget and more people involved, whatever. But yeah, yeah. And like I said, I feel like we've gone off here. You have to do so much to basically make an entire 3,000 plus planets feel like you're not being repetitive. And you could say maybe that's design scope. Maybe you shouldn't have gone that far, and then it's shallow and needs so much more. I'm hoping with the, this DLC, it's going to add 50 quests. I think they said you're going to have hero mechs, and, they're going to do interesting quest lines for them. You're going to have quirks. Okay. I'm wondering is, when are we going to see DLC 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Because we're now going to be 18 months, basically a year and a half.
They've had a long time, right,
yeah,
to work
man.
on this stuff.
December of
so
20,
hopefully it's pretty well fleshed out.
December of 2019. Like, that's a long. I get it, COVID. I get it. That's fair, but I hope
you keep moving forward as best as you can.
Well, I hope that because of EG7, and obviously that wasn't like it may have happened in November or whenever the buyout was, or whenever it happened, but because of the talks, Russ basically was like, hey, we need to make this as best as we can. And we're, obviously we're not launching on the 10th. We've got, 5 extra months. We need to make this pretty. We need to fix some of the issues, and they were able to dump some money and time and effort. I'm hoping, but I don't know. Anyways, man, I digress. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I look forward to seeing what you guys do in May. Whether it's the full shebang or a little bit, I guess we'll find out soon enough.
Yeah, we'll see. Well, we're always trying to be transparent, of course, the Cauldron. Yeah. So once we know, we'll release the information straight away. So that'll be good.
Well, and I think it's
PGI, Matt and Darren might do another, another podcast of their own to release the information too.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's fair to put a face and a voice, and someone knows, well, you're not just some crazy, try hard out there like GG Close, and you're not trying to ruin other people's experiences. You're wanting the game to be fun. You want people to come back. And is there any last words of advice? If someone is listening maybe and they haven't played for a while, should they come back?
I mean, it depends on the reason you left, I think, at the end of the day. If you left because of the desync, then definitely come back when May hits. If mech mobility was a big reason you left, we're really working hard on trying to fix that. So you should definitely come back. If you left for other reasons, like, I don't know, like the skill tree, for example, well, it's still really there. So I couldn't, in good faith, recommend that you return because that system hasn't changed yet. So I suppose, it's just one of those things. Depends on why you left in the first place.
Sure.
We're really working on making the weapons better. I think we've done a good job. We're going to continue working on that. Mobility's next. Quirks are planned to be after that. So we'll see.
Awesome, man.
I think it'll be good. And thanks for the chat. It was good.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. Like I said, this is a long podcast. I was like, oh yeah, maybe like 30 minutes. Nope, that totally didn't.
They blew out a bit. That's
yeah,
all right.
Yeah. So, all right. So we will touch base another day, another time. Thank you so much. And obviously look forward to seeing what you guys do and hearing back from you, obviously, post May patch. And yeah, man, I do appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
If you enjoyed that podcast, let me know down in the comments down below. I thought it was a great conversation. And quick shout out to Krasnopesky, man, I always mess that up, for joining on the podcast. It was a perspective and insight that I felt like needed to be added to the conversation, and I look forward to probably doing another with him in the near future. If you did enjoy the conversation, let me know what your thoughts are down below. If you are new, of course, click that follow button. You guys know what to do on all the platforms already. But I do need your help. I do need your support. Consider becoming a patron. It really does help me pay my bills so I can focus on creating content like this. And if that aligns with your awesome. If it doesn't, do not ever apologize. Thank you again for listening and watching this podcast. I hope to see you on the next episode. Until next time, Mechwarriors. Peace.